The little girl had no idea that a single innocent sentence would change two lives forever. The moving truck had barely pulled away when 8-year-old Maren stood on the sidewalk holding a glass jar full of wildflowers. The summer sun shone brightly over the quiet neighborhood, painting everything in warm gold. Children rode bicycles down the street, sprinklers clicked across green lawns, and birds sang from the trees. It seemed like an ordinary day, but for her father, nothing had felt ordinary for a very long time. Before we begin, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Hub if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories to people around the world. Maren carefully crossed the yard toward the newly occupied house next door. She had watched movers unload boxes all morning and had been curious about the woman who kept directing them. The woman looked young but tired, with thoughtful eyes that carried a sadness even from a distance. When the woman noticed Maren approaching, she smiled warmly. Maren proudly handed over the flowers. Then, in the wonderfully honest way only children can, she began talking. She mentioned that her name was Maren and that she lived next door with her dad. She explained that her father was very nice but worried too much. Then she shared something she thought was completely normal. Her dad forgot to eat whenever he was worried. The woman froze, the smile on her face disappeared. For a moment she simply stared at the child standing before her. Something in those words struck a place deep inside her heart. The woman thanked Maren and watched her skip back across the lawn. Long after the little girl disappeared inside her home, she remained standing there holding the flowers. Her name was Celine Hart, and she understood exactly what it meant to forget to eat when worry became heavier than hunger. Next door, Maren's father, Corwin Hale, sat at the kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills, repair estimates, and insurance documents. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. 3 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a sudden illness. Since then, every responsibility had landed on his shoulders. That he worked mornings at a construction company and spent evenings doing freelance drafting work. Every dollar went toward keeping their small home, paying school expenses, and building some kind of future for Maren. Most nights he slept only a few hours. Most mornings he woke with new worries. That he never complained. That he never let Maren see how frightened he was. But children noticed more than adults realized. They noticed the untouched dinner plates, they noticed the tired eyes, they noticed the forced smiles. And Maren noticed everything. Across the fence, Celine spent the afternoon unpacking. Yet her thoughts repeatedly returned to the little girl's words. Her dad forgets to eat when he's worried. Years ago, someone she loved had done the same thing. Her younger brother. He had carried everyone's burdens until they crushed him. The memory still hurt. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Celine glanced through her kitchen window and noticed a light glowing in Corwin's house. Hours later, the same light remained on. Then another night passed, and another. The pattern repeated itself. Corwin left before sunrise and returned after dark. Sometimes he sat alone on the porch staring into the distance. Sometimes he worked under a lamp late into the night. Sometimes he looked so exhausted that Celine wondered how he remained standing. Yet every morning Maren left for school smiling. Her father clearly loved her beyond measure. One Saturday afternoon, fate intervened. Corwin was repairing a section of fence separating the properties when one of the wooden boards slipped unexpectedly. He lost his balance and fell awkwardly. Celine rushed over. The injury was minor, but she immediately noticed how pale he looked, the kind of pale that suggested exhaustion rather than injury, the kind of pale that appeared after months of carrying too much. Corwin insisted he was fine. Like many people who struggled alone, he had become an expert at pretending, but Celine wasn't convinced. Later that evening, she baked an extra casserole and brought it next door. Corwin tried politely refusing, then his stomach growled loud enough for both of them to hear. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely embarrassed. Celine laughed softly, not cruelly, not judgmentally, just kindly, the kind of laughter that reminded someone they were human. Corwin accepted the meal. It became the first of many small acts. Nothing dramatic happened. No grand speeches. No miraculous transformations. Just small kindnesses appearing consistently. Sometimes Celine dropped off homemade bread, sometimes she brought extra soup, sometimes she simply checked in. At first Corwin resisted every gesture. Pride often disguises itself as independence. He told himself he didn't need help. He told himself he could handle everything. Yet deep down he knew the truth. He was exhausted, and exhaustion had become his normal. weeks turned into months, summer slowly unfolded across the neighborhood. Marin adored having Celine next door. The little girl often helped water flowers, carry groceries, or organize books. The three gradually formed an unexpected friendship. Still, Corwin carried secrets. Financial pressure continued mounting. The construction company where he worked had begun reducing hours, several major home repairs were approaching, and despite all his efforts, he felt like he was falling behind. One afternoon he received news that nearly broke him. The roof needed immediate replacement after storm damage. The estimate was far beyond what he could afford. That evening he sat alone at the kitchen table, the familiar pile of paperwork spread before him. For hours he stared at numbers that refused to work. Outside, daylight faded, darkness filled the room. Yet he never turned on the lights. Eventually there was a gentle knock. Celine stood at the door. She immediately sensed something was wrong. Corwin tried offering his usual smile, that it failed. The truth finally surfaced. Months of fear, pressure, grief, and responsibility poured out, not dramatically, not loudly, simply honestly. He admitted how overwhelmed he felt. He admitted he was terrified of failing Marin. He admitted he sometimes felt completely alone. The confession seemed to drain years of weight from his shoulders. Celine listened quietly. No interruptions. No easy solutions, just understanding. Sometimes that is the greatest gift one human can offer another. When Corwin finished speaking, he realized something surprising. She wasn't looking at him with pity, she was looking at him with respect, because surviving difficult days required strength, and she recognized it. Over the following weeks, Celine helped him connect with community resources, trusted contractors, and financial assistance programs he hadn't known existed. The support didn't magically erase every problem, but it gave him breathing room. More importantly, it reminded him he wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Marin watched everything. Children often understand emotional truths long before adults do. She noticed her father smiling more, she noticed him eating dinner regularly, she noticed laughter returning to their home. One bright autumn afternoon, Marin sat drawing pictures at the kitchen table, without realizing anyone was listening. She sketched three figures standing together beneath a tree. One was labeled Dad. One was labeled me, the third was labeled Celine. Corwin noticed the drawing and felt something stir inside him. For months, Celine had quietly become part of their lives, not by force, not by expectation, simply through kindness. The friendship deepened naturally, holiday decorations appeared, shared meals became common. Weekend projects turned into traditions. For the first time since losing his wife, Corwin stopped living solely in survival mode. He began living again. Yet the most powerful moment arrived unexpectedly. Near Christmas, Marin's school hosted a family appreciation event. Parents and guardians were invited. During the program, children were asked to write about someone who made them feel safe. When Marin stepped forward to read her essay, the room fell silent. She wrote about her father. She described how hard he worked, how he always protected her, how he never stopped trying even when life was difficult. Then she wrote something that brought tears to many eyes. She said heroes were not people who never got tired, heroes were people who kept going even when they were tired. Corwin lowered his head, emotion overwhelmed him. Years of sacrifice suddenly felt seen. Then Marin added one final sentence. She wrote that she was happy her dad had someone looking after him too. Her eyes found Celine in the audience. The room became completely silent. Celine's eyes filled with tears. So did Corwin's. At that moment, both realized something extraordinary. A little girl's innocent honesty months earlier had started a chain of kindness neither could have predicted. If this story is touching your heart, please like, comment, and share this video. Stories like these remind us that kindness often begins with the smallest moments. The following spring brought fresh beginnings. Flowers bloomed, trees awakened, and life continued moving forward. Corwin was still hardworking, still responsible, still devoted to his daughter, but he no longer carried every burden alone. Celine remained beside them, not because she had to, but because she chose to, and that choice changed everything. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones quietly struggling behind closed doors. Sometimes they don't need rescuing, they simply need someone to notice, someone to care, someone to remind them that carrying the world alone was never the requirement for being worthy of love. Special request: comment below with the words, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe one small act of compassion can transform someone's future. Years later, Marin would barely remember the wildflowers she carried across the lawn that summer morning. She would barely remember the exact words she spoke, but she would always remember what happened afterward, because one innocent sentence revealed a hidden struggle, one caring neighbor chose not to ignore it, and one weary father discovered that accepting kindness can be just as brave as giving it. The truth is that many people around us are fighting silent battles. They smile while carrying worries nobody sees. They continue showing up despite exhaustion, heartbreak, and fear. Sometimes all it takes is a simple act of compassion to remind them they matter, and perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside this story. Not every miracle arrives with fanfare, sometimes it arrives carrying a jar of wildflowers, spoken through the honesty of a child, and delivered straight to a heart that needed to hear it most, and in that quiet moment, everything begins to change. The end.